Welcome. Welcome to PRO213, everybody that is reviewing this at a later time. We don't have any active live session participants tonight, unfortunately, but that's okay. We'll go ahead and get you the material that you need, and hopefully you guys will be able to review this and feel comfortable with the material that we present. So just as a quick review, we're about halfway through the course, so congratulations. You made it. You have a learning coach, you have me, you have a lab, you have all kinds of resources. So if you find yourself in a situation where you have questions or concerns and are not able to get done what you need to get done because you're stuck on something, please, 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 you've got resources. Reach out to us right away. Let me know, and hopefully we can get you unstuck. So for those of you who just find yourself behind because life's been busy, go ahead and get your work in as soon as possible. As a reminder, I do accept work all the way up until Saturday at midnight. Not this Saturday, but next Saturday, which is the course close here in 2 weeks. So I encourage you to get caught up as soon as possible so that you don't find yourself in a situation where you potentially could run out of time and not have the ability to get all your work in. So that is just your quick reminder. Many of you are doing very well in the course so far. The boards have been very good, so I appreciate that, and hopefully we'll be able to keep that up. All right, so this week we're going to learn a little bit more about how to actually manage our money. So we learned about budgeting in week 1. We learned a little bit about lifestyle choices in week 2. The whole context of week 1 is keep track. The whole context of week 2 is, you know, if you'll live like other people won't now, you'll be able to live like other people can't later. That's the Dave Ramsey line, not necessarily his line, but one that he quotes quite a bit about. Make lifestyle choices to live within your means. If you'll do that and pay yourself and invest and save for the future and pay down debt, you'll be in a situation where it'll be liberating. You'll have a lot more opportunities and a lot more flexibility down the road, where people who are encumbered by a lot of debt, no matter how much money they make, tend to have fewer choices, fewer options when it comes to retirement and the opportunities later on in life. So just as a recap, lifestyle is about deciding to live within our means. It's not how much we make, but how we use what we make, how we live within what we make, our ability to discipline ourselves between needs and wants. And this isn't about, you know, living like a pauper and, you know, moving back in with our parents and not having, you know, not doing anything fun and you know, I mean, that's not what I'm suggesting. What I am suggesting is that most of us can take wherever we're at and find opportunities for savings each month and paying ourselves and paying down debt if we will go through and make decisions about needs and wants, you know, and really make a concerted effort to keep our spending in check, and also concentrate, as we discussed before, on how to improve income. So the one side is cutting costs, but the other side is improving income. Both, obviously, a dollar in one place or the other is helpful, right? It's the same dollar that goes to the bottom line and can do something good for us. Many of us don't have as much control over the income, and that's why we usually focus on expenses and making sure to keep our costs in check. So we track and control. We have a budget. We talked about how there's lots of apps and tools out there. We have 2 different things we can control, right? Income and costs. We've alluded to this. But sometimes one is harder than another to adjust. So for example, for some people, increasing income without, for example, finishing their education or moving, you know, may be very, very difficult. For other people, they might have their expenses at, you know, at an absolute skeleton minimum, you know, just absolute minimum. And so for them, maybe there are ways that they could find what we refer to as side hustles, right? Something that they can do with a little bit of extra of their time, if possible, or extra effort on the side to make a few extra bucks. And then finally, the importance of credit. And credit really becomes significant for what we're talking about and focusing on this week, which is more about debt management. So it's about really trying to get control of debt and making sure that we pay off debt as fast as we can. And part of paying off debt as fast as we can is getting good terms on our debt, right? Difference between having 25% daily compounding interest rate credit card versus 2.9% on an auto loan or 2.9% 9% on a home equity line of credit is significant. The difference in how fast we can pay those latter two down and how fast we can pay down the former, which is that really, really high interest rate credit card, is night and day. So something to keep in mind, something to really always be focused on and cognizant of is how are we doing from a credit standpoint. Tonight I want to take just a couple seconds and talk about, different ways that we can all potentially look at additional income. And I wanted to tell you kind of my personal story, and this isn't because this is the right way to do it, but it just does illustrate, I think, some different things that you might be able to do on the side. So when I was first married and Tawny and I were going to school, we were both going to school full-time and working full-time and barely making it by, as far as our finances month to month. It became evident to me very quickly that Tawny enjoyed eating out, and my upbringing in rural Idaho was such that I didn't worry about going out to eat. We hardly ever ate out, so I just didn't think about it. I didn't ever, think about, hey, we should go out and go to fast food, or we should go out and sit down and eat dinner once or twice a week. That was foreign to me. I didn't grow up with that, and so I didn't expect that. I didn't think about that. And frankly, when she would, mention, hey, maybe we should go out to eat, I would always think, well, that's just such a waste of money. I don't want to do that. So this kind of back and forth about going out to eat, or at least enjoying a meal once in a while out to eat, started to escalate to a point where about a year into our marriage, I thought, wow, this is frustrating, because I don't think we have enough money to go out to eat, but it's obviously very important, that we go out to eat more for my marriage, for my relationship. And so I began to look into secret shopping, which is an opportunity to basically audit different restaurants and fast food places and even stores and hotels and all kinds of different places, movie theaters, games, for different sporting events, and basically started signing up for opportunities to do some secret shopping. Now, this was something that I could do in my free time as far as the sign-up process, which did take a long time, but it was all online. And once I was approved to shop with these different companies, I could check what they had posted. Some of them had things and others didn't. It's kind of a hit and miss situation. It took a lot of effort and time to get, some different situations that I was comfortable with as far as shopping. But it turned into a situation where Tawny and I were able to go out to eat once, twice, sometimes even more a week, and satisfy something that was important to her, and ended up being a fun thing for us to do together. But it also actually developed into something where I was able to make a few extra dollars on the side and not spend any of our own hard-earned money on eating out. So anyway, that's just an example of something, sometimes desperation kind of creates opportunity. And we were definitely desperate back then. We had nothing extra. We were barely making ends meet, so I didn't see an opportunity for us to eat out without going into debt. And there are opportunities out there like secret shopping to be able to eat out once in a while without spending. So that's one option. One event or one thing that happened in my earlier young married life. Another thing that happened is one of the at one juncture, I had just barely gotten my master's degree. I was doing financial advisory services for Northwestern Mutual, and I was not making very much. Even though I was doing well as far as they were concerned, I was selling a lot of insurance policies and setting up a lot of new IRAs and investment accounts. None of them were very profitable. And so even though I was very busy and I was doing a lot of good and setting up a lot of different accounts, I wasn't making very much. And we were having our first child, and I, started to think, wow, this isn't working out too well. Well, with a master's degree, I was able to apply at a couple different local schools to teach a class or two. And that's actually eventually how I got teaching through Independence U. Was initially I taught for Provo College, I taught for Broadview, I taught a class at UVU here in Utah County. And these adjunct professor jobs would pay a decent little bit extra, and that became important income to our family budget. Another time at another point in our lives, I was transitioning from a job to another job, and it was financially we just weren't making it because in this world, most of what we make is commission based. or fee-based investment services, right? So you have to build up a clientele. And when I started at a new business, I didn't have that clientele. And so it took me, probably 12 months to get ramped back up to where we could meet our expenses. Well, in the meantime, I had this deficit, and I didn't want to go into debt. And so I took a job on the weekends, on Friday night and Saturday night, where I would go into a local depot and just sort newspapers for newspaper carriers for the next morning, and just stage basically these things. And it was really intense. It was really hard work, in addition to working the normal hours during the week. But it was something that made just enough little bit extra in order to help us to be able to make our payments during those times. And then finally, just one other quick example. A few years back, I decided that, again, that I would like to be able to enjoy a concert or a sporting event or a Broadway musical once in a while here locally. But again, didn't think it was within our budget a few years back to be able to do all those things financially. And so I looked into being able to, buy on pre-sale some different concert tickets or, theater tickets, and things like that. And I would buy a few extras and sell those for basically enough money to pay for us to be able to go. And then it's turned into, at different times, an opportunity to make a few extra dollars as well. But more importantly, just the ability to go enjoy a show or enjoy a concert and not have to worry about it financially because we're paying for it with the tickets that we sell. So anyway, just some examples of different things. Those aren't necessarily the right gigs for all of you, or the side hustles, for all of you to create a little bit of income or lower costs for you guys. But I did want to just mention them because I think it starts to get people thinking, hey, maybe there is something, that I could look into or do. And maybe if I visit with some other people about different things, maybe there's some opportunities that I could look into. Christy, welcome. Thanks for joining. Can you hear me okay? Hello, Christy. You should be able to see week 2 review and hear my voice. Christy, can you type in just to confirm whether or not you can hear me speaking, please? All right. Hey, thanks, Christy. And thanks for joining. Appreciate you. I just got done talking about 3 or 4 different side gigs that I did while working or going to school over the years, just to make a little bit extra or to enjoy something that we wanted to enjoy but just felt like we couldn't afford within our budget. And so we looked for opportunities to be creative, and sometimes that works out. Now, a lot of times, you come up blank. You look and look and look and just can't find anything that really works for your situation. But it is worth the effort because at some point you might find that side, little deal that is a good gig. And I would encourage you to look beyond, just all the little sales things, like the multi-level marketing sales jobs. Those aren't the worst thing in the world, but a lot of those take considerable effort and time to ever make any money. And initially they can be more of a cash drain than a cash help, right? And so I would avoid those for the most part. There are some uniquely good opportunities if you're passionate about them that could be okay. But there are a lot of other opportunities that don't require your capital or money up front and give you the opportunity to, make a few extra bucks or enjoy something that you were hoping to enjoy anyway. Okay? And Christy, you can go back and listen to, those different things that we had talked about. But as I mentioned, they're not for everybody. It's just, I just wanted to bring them up because hopefully it'll get you thinking about maybe opportunities, if it makes sense to, with spare time that you have, if you have any, to be able to make a few extra bucks or do something fun. Okay? All right. So we've done our little review. Let's go on to new material for week 3. So for week 3, the main thing for week 3 is your discussion board, of course. You've just got one discussion board a week, and of course keep up with your checkpoints. I'll have your grades in for the discussion board last week before tomorrow at noon, as always. But this week, we only have 2 pair responses, and we have an interview that's due. And this interview is basically you finding somebody that you know, hopefully that you know well, so that you're comfortable, and you are able to observe the fact that they are decent with their money, right? So A lot of times you might see somebody that looks like they're rich. That doesn't necessarily mean they're good with their money, right? But if you get to know somebody, rich or poor, you might start to understand whether or not they're disciplined and good with their money, right? So we're brainstorming. We started brainstorming last week about different people who we think are good with their money. And this week, the deal is we're supposed to contact that person and have either a live face-to-face or phone interview with them regarding money management. Okay, that's why I say hopefully it's somebody that you're comfortable with and that's easy to talk to and that you know well, but that isn't that is still willing to visit with you about financial issues too, because some people aren't, right? Some people don't want to talk about financial issues. But I wanted to give you guys some examples or some ideas on different questions that you could ask. And I mentioned this on the discussion board already this week, but one of the things I think is very important is the more time you put into some well thought out questions, I feel like when it comes to an interview, the better that interview will go. Okay, so hopefully I can give you some ideas for some questions tonight. Hopefully you'll think through even more based on whomever it is that you're going to actually interview, what kinds of questions would be good to mention and things that would be good to start conversation with them. So you could, start a conversation with, how do you manage your money? How do you do it? And they might say something like, well, I don't. I just pay all the bills, and then you might say, well, how do you make sure you have enough? Or how do you make sure and always live within your means? Or do you make sure and live within your means? So there's some different follow-up questions that you could say. Somebody might say, yeah, I keep a budget. And you might say, well, how do you do it? I'm anxious to know how people budget because I've tried different ways or I've looked at different ways, and I'd love to hear your feedback on the way that has worked for you, right? They might say they don't have a budget. You might say, okay, well, how do you keep track of what you spend? They might say that they do keep track based on like a spreadsheet, and basically that's a budget, right? Or they might say, I look at my mobile banking or online banking all the time, like every day, to keep track of everything. And that's another way or form of basic budgeting, right? So anyway, all I'm saying is sometimes a question the answer might be no, or I don't do that, and it might not be what you expect. But that's okay. Just roll with it and ask follow-up questions to find out more information about it. So one of the ways that you'll really, that most people like to give advice, because that's a way for them to feel smart and important and helpful. And we all want to feel smart, important, and helpful. So one of the things you want to make sure and do is ask them for advice. What advice would you give others about managing their money? What mistakes or something I should have, share a mistake or something I should avoid with my money based on your experience. What do you see other people do that you think, oh, that's just not a good way to use money, right? Or manage their money. That gives them an opportunity to give you some advice, again, on things that they think they know and that they have good perspective on. What tips could you give me managing my own finances? Anything that you wish you could have done different, as you look back over your finances over all the years that you've had to manage your household finances, what would you do different? What kinds of things would you change? What kinds of things are you really grateful that you did? So positives. And anyway, even that group of questions that I just gave you, Christy, would be enough to have what this week's discussion board is calling for. It's not calling for a really, really long interview, but it is calling for more than just a question or two, right? I would say at a minimum, you want to be asking 5 or 6 or have 5 or 6 questions prepared. And at a minimum, you want to be able to follow up on some of those questions to get more than just 1 or 2 word answers, right? So just decent, basic conversation skills. So hopefully you're finding someone, again, that you know well enough that you can have a good conversation with and that it will be comfortable. It won't be awkward or anything like that. But also at the same time, it'll be something that you can learn and get some information and ideas that you can share with the rest of us so that we can all learn together this week on the discussion board. All right, so having said that, Christy, any questions about this week's interview for the discussion board? Any concerns that you have? Anything that you're worried about? Yeah, so the instructions don't call for a minimum, Christy, but if you're going to do a substantive post, my thought would be you'd have at least 5 or so questions, and you'd have some follow-ups to those questions to get more than just 1 or 2 word answers if that's what you're getting. Because if you ask 1 or 2 questions and that's it, and all they give is 1 or 2 word answers, you don't have enough content, right, for a 2 to 3 paragraph, substantive, main post. And so I would add, like in your case, Christy, if you've got 4, I'd just make sure you got 1 more, right? Think of like a follow-up question that you could ask or something else. I think 5 is a good number where if you're having a good conversation with somebody, it won't seem kind of abrupt. If you ask them 1 or 2 questions or maybe even 3, they might feel like, this person's just trying to get through this, for their assignment and that's it. What you want them to feel, if I'm the one doing the interview, you want them to feel like you legitimately want to know, right? And so if you want to legitimately know something, usually if you're anxious to know something or excited to know something, you'll usually ask a few follow-up questions, not just 1 or 2 questions and then be done. Okay? And that'll help you out and have more content for, for the board, obviously. Yeah, you could definitely say that. So I look at money management and then investment management potentially as 2 different things. So if somebody asked me, who do you use to manage your money? I would say, I don't use anybody. I manage my own finances, right? Day to day, I pay my bills and do what I do with my money. I direct it. But if you ask me, who is your money manager or your investment manager, I would say it's so-and-so at JP Morgan, or it's so-and-so at Fidelity. They help me with my money. Or I go online and use Vanguard, or I use T. Rowe Price, or I use my 401k administrator. So if you're looking to ask them who does their investments for them, I would ask them, who does your investment management? If you're looking to, or helps you with your investment management. If you're looking for who helps you with your day-to-day, bookkeeping or your bill paying or anything like that, some very wealthy people will hire somebody full-time to do kind of their bookkeeping, pay all their bills, and take care of their money. So it just depends on what you're asking, Christy. The way I thought you initially meant that was about investment management, but I guess if you're dealing with somebody that's really, really wealthy, they could also have somebody in office or at their home that actually pays bills for them and takes care of all their money. Any follow-up questions on that? I think that's a good question if you are anxious to, to find out if somebody helps them manage their money. Like, do they and their spouse do it together? I think that's a great question. Yes, I think that's a better question, because then it opens the door for them to answer it however they want. Where your initial question, I thought I didn't know for sure what you were asking. I didn't know if you were just asking about investments or if you're asking about who helps me with my budgeting, and I don't have anybody that helps with that. Most people don't. Okay, I think you're in great shape. Do you have a few different options on people to interview, or have you already picked somebody out that you're going to interview? Nice. Yeah, I think, somebody like your best friend, hopefully that's not awkward, Christy. It's something that's pretty casual and easy to talk to, because they're somebody that you know well, and you trust their feedback too. It still is complimentary and flattering to have somebody ask for advice, right? Even if they are your best friend. So they should like that. But anyway. All right, so that's all we want to do as far as talking about the discussion this week. There are, if you should be able to see a page that says Readings, Money Management International, Week 3 here on the screen, Christy. And there are 3 different articles or segments for this week as far as the required material. One of them is an article about debt and how to deal with debt. One of them this week is an article about money etiquette, so manners when it comes to dealing with money. And then finally, one of the required content material items for this week is a video. It's actually a 15, 16-minute video, and it talks about debt management, debt reduction, and credit. Now, all three could be helpful. They are required, obviously, material, so I'd expect that you'd review all of them. I'm going to touch on just some high points from all three of them, and then I'm going to go on to some material that's not part of our required readings, but is about money management and debt management. And the thing I would mention before that is if you in your area, if you're trying to get a hold, really pay down debt and really get a handle on debt, if you have in your area a bank or a church group that sponsors and makes Financial Peace University more affordable, which is Dave Ramsey's program for getting out of debt, I would encourage you to consider taking those classes, because Dave Ramsey is one of the best at helping people to get a hold of themselves financially, basically, and get out of debt. Christy, back to your question. The answer is you do it however it makes the best sense. Most times, I like to see the question, but having said that, if you can write it in a format that allows us to kind of understand what you were asking about, then you don't have to write the question word for word. Does that make sense? So it's up to you. You can format it however you want. I prefer to see the question and then the answer. That's just me. But there's no right or wrong formatting to it. You could, if within the answers the person is basically helping us understand what the question was, then we don't need the question. Okay. All right. So back to what I alluded to earlier. Beyond the content that we've got, bullet points are just fine. Bullet points are just fine. I think the point of this is to try to get the answers, right? So if somebody's reading your post and they don't know what the questions were, and so the answers don't really make sense, then that's not going to be very helpful, right? We just want to make sure that somebody knows what the question is and knows what the answer was in relation to that question. And so if you want to bullet those out, that's just fine. All right, so as I mentioned, there are three required content pieces for this week. The one that's the Money Management International is an interesting link, talks about debt, specifically talks about home debt, so a mortgage, talks about credit cards, and then it talks about car loans. It doesn't talk about student loans or payday pawn or title loans, and we'll talk about those just a little bit in addition. But it does talk about kind of the terms of a mortgage or a home debt. And home debt is probably the largest piece of debt that you'll ever have. Hopefully it is, because if your car was bigger or if your student loan was bigger, then maybe we're doing something a little backwards. But most times for most people, a loan to get into the home that they want is their largest debt. It also is a debt that takes us the longest, so it's not only is it the biggest, but it also takes us, on average in America, 30 years or so to pay off a mortgage, and that's the most common type of loan, is a 30-year mortgage, which means that over 30 years the bank is going to make back their money, what they let you borrow to buy the house, plus interest, right? So if I'm paying a 4 or 5% interest rate, over the 30-year period, they're going to make 1.5 times more on our loan than the principal balance. So if it's $100,000, they're going to make about $150,000 back in interest over the life of a 30-year loan. Okay, so that's just an example. And some people hear that and say, "Oh my gosh, the banks are pillaging." There's no way we should borrow money from the bank then. And that's fine. The problem is they're kind of the only option when it comes to borrowing money for a house. So if you're wanting to get into a house and don't have all the money that you need to buy the house, then the bank's your option, and they will charge you in an interest rate, which might not sound very high, but over, as we've talked about, the life of a mortgage, you're going to be paying a lot more, usually a lot more than even double what the home price was in interest. That's why if you can at all pay down your debt a little bit faster, so every year that you pay down your house a little bit faster by adding a little bit extra each month, saves you significant amounts of interest and can make it more, make it so you're not paying as much in interest. But the article does a good job of kind of talking about the terms of a mortgage and the terms of a home loan. It talks about credit cards. And primarily, there's two different camps of credit cards out there. There are cards that pay us rewards, okay, like miles, flight miles, and different points, that we get cash back or other gift cards or prizes. And then there are cards that focus almost entirely on trying to give us the lowest interest rate possible. And for people who are really good at budgeting, those rewards cards are great because they never carry a balance. They always pay off their card every single month. For people who are not great at paying off all their debts every month, those rewards cards are not good because they tend to have the highest interest rates. So if I'm getting 1% cash back on everything I buy, but I keep a balance, I could be paying 20 or 25% back to the credit card company for the right to have that card because they're basically lending me the money. I'm not paying it off month to month. So if you're going to have a balance on a credit card, which I would never suggest, but if you're in a situation where that has to happen, then I would have a credit card that is not focused on points or rewards at all, but is focused on trying to be the lowest interest rate possible. And then if you're a good budgeter and you don't ever keep a balance from month to month on a credit card, then I would absolutely go and find the highest rewards card or the best rewards card for your situation. Okay? Just as a side note, if a credit card has a 20 or 24% interest rate, which many credit cards do, and you're paying the minimum payments, many times those minimum payments will take you 20, 25 years to pay off the card, which sounds crazy, but that's just how it is. When the interest rate is that high, it will take you many, many years. You will make very little progress towards the balance of the credit card if you don't make extra payments beyond the minimum payment. Okay? So just keep that in mind. Don't ever get caught in a trap where you're only making minimum payments on a high interest rate credit card. I know it's tough, but any extra dollar that you can add to those minimum payments makes your life much better by being able to pay off that debt a little sooner. And then we've got car loans. And what I would say about car loans right now is there's a wide range of what I see when it comes to car loans. I see people that come in and they have a 12% car loan because they bought a used car and they didn't have great credit, so they paid 12 or 15% interest. And then I see people who come into my office that have an 800 credit score and they were able to get 0% interest on a deal for a new car from a dealership. So like Ford or GM will run these specials where if you have good credit and you buy a brand new vehicle, they will give you 0% interest. Now, having said that, I've already mentioned Dave Ramsey. He would say never ever buy a brand new car. Brand new cars lose 25 to 30% of their value the moment you drive them off the lot, and so it's not a great use of your money to buy new. Having said that, like I say, there are financing deals that are really, really good and very, very low interest when it comes to new vehicles sometimes. And sometimes they're very good on used vehicles. Over the last 4 or 5 years when rates have been low, if you had really good credit, even with a used car, you could get into the twos as far as an interest rate for a 5 or 6 or 7 year loan. And so over that 5 or 6 or 7 years, they're collecting interest. The bank is. That's why they're willing to borrow you the money or lend you the money. But hopefully, with a few extra payments and things like that, you can get out of car loans within 4 or 5 years. Okay? And of course, again, back to how Ramsey would look at it, Ramsey would say, don't ever take a car loan. Buy a car for $1,000 to $2,000 that gets you from one place to another and pay it with cash. So not realistic for all of us, I realize. Not ideal for all of us, I realize, but that would be Ramsey's solution to trying to get on top of your debt and pay it all off, would be put away money so that you can pay cash. And as long as you pay cash, he doesn't care how much you pay for a car, but he would encourage you to buy something used and kind of junky initially just to get from place to place so that you can use your money, in different ways that are better than towards a car that's not going to be worth anything when you're done driving it, right? So cars are kind of money pits. And so that's why he'd give the advice to not put a lot of money into them. Plus, a lot of times people end up with car payments, $400 or $500 a month for one of them and $400 or $500 for another one. So their household might be paying $800 or $900 or even as much as $1,000 a month in car payments. That becomes very difficult to pay down other debt. It becomes very difficult to save for the future if you're paying that much towards just your cars. Okay? So this article didn't talk about student loans. It didn't talk about payday title or pawn loans. What I would say about student loans is student loans usually are deferred, right, until we are done with school. And then a lot of times when we're done with school, they still have a very competitive low interest rate. But I would be careful to make sure, again, that when you're trying to pay down debts once you get that first job and you're done with school, that you focus the very best you can on trying to pay off those student loans as fast as possible. I know there are a lot of people out there that write and talk about just, letting them be the last thing that they pay off. And I would tell you, it goes back to that debt management strategy we talked about last week or the week before, where we talked about how there's two different main ways to pay off debt. When we look at all our debt, there's the snowball way, which just says, like Dave Ramsey talks about, which is just where you take the smallest debt, you pay it off first, and then you take the payment that you're making on that and add it to the next smallest debt. And in that way, you gain a lot of early momentum and get things paid off very quickly. Another way another camp says just take the thing that has the highest interest rate and pay it off, which would usually not be student loans, right? Student loans usually have lower interest rates than other types of debt, but it could be that they're the highest. I think the best way to do debt pay down is a combination of those two, right? So obviously take into perspective how high the interest rate is. If you have $1,000 on a credit card that's at 25% and you have $900 on the rest of a car loan that is only at 3%, I don't care that the credit card is a little bit larger debt. I do care that it has such a high interest rate, and I'm going to focus everything I possibly can. Any payment, extra money that I can possibly get together is going to go towards that credit card debt because it's so much higher. Okay? So kind of a combination of using logic between interest rate and size of the debt. If the size of the debt is much, much smaller, then I would go to size of the debt. If the size of the debt is similar within, thousands of dollars, within a few $1,000, then I would go with highest interest rate as far as debt pay down. As far as payday title and pawn loans, my general point would be on these to try to avoid them. All three of these usually have pretty significant interest rates associated with them. And a lot of people get in trouble because they can get payday loans or they can get title loans or pawn loans, and then they have a challenge paying those back. A lot of title loans, repo a lot of cars. They end up taking back a lot of vehicles. A lot of pawn shops end up keeping whatever it was that we were pawning, right? Our wedding rings, our sports equipment, our guns, whatever it is, because we can't pay them back. And they know that, and that's what they're in the business of doing, is basically taking our products when we're not able to pay back our loan on them. So I would just encourage you to try to avoid payday title and pawn loans if at all possible. I realize there are circumstances that you might feel like you have no other option, but whenever possible, try to avoid those types of loans. Okay? Just because of interest rates and terms, they're not as good as any other kind of debt that you could have. All right. Any questions on that first reading, Christy, before we move on to the next couple? Or about just different types of debt in general that you've been curious about? Okay? If you think of anything, let me know. So there are a couple more readings, as I mentioned. One is about marketplace money manners. And this article is kind of about etiquette and what you should or shouldn't do when it comes to money. And I would say, and I don't know if the article really alludes to this, but I would say generations are very different about this. So my grandparents, it was not okay to talk about money, even with family. They were just very private about it. That was their private thing. They didn't want to disclose how much they were worth or what they had. As a general rule, of course, there are exceptions to this, but generationally, they just weren't very open about money. So that's my grandparents' generation. My parents' generation, they were a little bit more open about money, but they some of them weren't very good with their money, right? They're not as good of savers as my grandparents' generation. My grandparents' generation, they're the ones that came out of World War II, came through World War II, and they are very, very frugal, and they are very good savers. And then my parents' generation, they have more products and things like 401ks, and they have more things that they could have done to save, but they weren't as good at paying down debt and saving as their parents were. And then my generation tends to be pretty smart about money, but not very disciplined. So they understand what they should do. They've got the tools to do it. They've got a lot of tools that even make it easy, but they're not, as a general rule, very disciplined to do it. Okay? They're not nearly as frugal as our grandparents were, and they're not, it's just, so they are doing some things, to prepare for the future for their children, but as far as their own retirement plans, pretty underfunded, pretty off base. So the only reason I brought that up is because based on the generation as a general rule, and I realize there are exceptions to what I just mentioned and the stereotypes I just mentioned, but as a general rule, if you're speaking with somebody in my grandparents' generation, you've got to be careful how you talk about money. Allow them to kind of lead the conversation when it comes to visiting about money, because most times they're not going to want to talk specifics or disclose very much. Parents' generation, like I say, the boomers, they tend to be more open about money, but kind of clueless about it. So they're kind of intimidated or by it, and have not been as disciplined as they should about living frugal. A lot of them are kind of, the reason that they spend a little bit more is because they were so frustrated with how little their parents spent, right? How tight their parents were. If you grow up with tight parents, sometimes you end up being the opposite. You end up spending more because you just, it was frustrating to have, that situation. So this article goes into some different things about specifically how you don't ask someone how much they make or how much their bonuses are. That's just money etiquette, especially within a work environment. You don't ask your colleague how much they make or how much their bonuses were. That becomes a point of concern and problem and conflict often. And so in most workplaces, that's just not okay. Maybe at a fast food restaurant, you might share that information. But if you're working as a professional within a professional workplace environment, probably not a good idea to start talking about or asking someone else how much they make. The other thing it talks about, and I think this is pretty straightforward, pretty self-explanatory, is that our kids shouldn't be asking relatives for money. Okay, and sometimes we need to explain that to our kids. It just doesn't occur to them that it might not be proper etiquette or even polite or respectful at all to walk up to a cousin, aunt, or uncle that makes a lot of money and just say, "Hey, will you lend me some money? Will you let me borrow some money? Will you give me some money? Will you help me out with something, financially?" That may be a last resort thing to do, but I think the article is kind of referring to, kids feeling like that's okay. And most other family members are going to feel like that's not okay and completely out of bounds, and actually will cause a rift and a problem between, the relationships between, siblings, parents, cousins, if we start asking each other for money like that. Okay. So I realize that there are some circumstances where we get desperate and there may be an exception to that, but as a general rule, especially for our kids, we don't want them going around at a family reunion and asking people for a loan or for money. Okay. All right. Pretty self-explanatory. That article, I don't know. There's some things in that article some things I disagree with, some things I agree with. It's just interesting. It's an interesting article, and it's worth a good read and some of your thought. And then there's a video. And the video is credit.org, and my advice to you on this video is please do not sign up for anything. Okay, this video's whole idea is it's a advertisement for debt management or credit counseling. And I would just encourage you not to, don't click on anything, just watch the video. It's got some decent information about credit and about debt. But absolutely don't click on anything. Don't sign up for anything. There's no reason to do that. Okay. So it does talk about, different ways that you can get out of debt. You could obviously set up your own program. That would be the Dave Ramsey way, kind of do it yourself program. And then there's things called credit counseling, and there are groups called debt managers, debt management companies. And they're a little bit different. Credit counselors are going to usually be in a situation where they help you to, pay debt over time. And many times credit counselors are non-for-profits, which is a little bit misunderstood. That doesn't mean that they don't make money and charge fees, but it just means that they're not a big profitable, Fortune 500 company. They definitely can still make money even if they're non-for-profit, right? And the folks who are the proprietors of these types of products many times make very good money because of fees that people pay to get into credit counseling. Now, there's government-related credit counseling and there's non-government-related credit counseling. Obviously, the government entities probably a little bit safer. Some of them might be a little bit more legitimate than the non-government credit counseling agencies. And then you have debt management companies. These companies will basically go to your creditors and try to negotiate for you to make one payment to them and for them to negotiate down your debt. So they make money trying to reduce your debt, and they usually charge a fee to accomplish that. But the pitch will be, if you've got $50,000 worth of credit cards and $20,000 on a car and $30,000 on an unsecured loan, so you got $100,000 total, they'll say, okay, we will pay your creditors and we will pay it off faster and at a lower payment if you'll allow us to be in charge of it. And you might say, well, how can they do that? Well, what they do is they go to your creditors and they basically say, you need to negotiate with us the terms on these debts. You might have to lower the amount. Basically, they convince them that if they don't, that you'll go into bankruptcy and they won't get anything. And so they basically go to bat for you and negotiate with your creditors better terms. But in both cases, in both credit counseling and debt management, you're going to destroy your credit. So just know that your credit scores are really going to go through the garbage, go into the garbage if you in most cases when you use a debt management company. Okay, kind of a last resort type approach. Credit counseling and debt management. If you just have tried everything, you just cannot get out, and you don't want to declare bankruptcy, this is an option just before bankruptcy that might help. Again, Ramsey has some opinions on it. His opinion would be do it yourself, set up your own debt management program. Don't pay somebody else to destroy your credit. Keep your credit good and just be more disciplined. Make extra payments. Set up payment plans with everybody. Be very frugal. Be diligent about what you're doing as far as, making sure that you can pay everything down and keep up with everything. And absolutely don't get into additional debt. That's the hard part, right? We know how to get out of debt, but sometimes we also know how to get into debt just as fast, and so then we never make progress. Okay? So that's the other article. Again, just a reminder, please do not click on anything or sign up for any program or part of those, that site from that video. It's good information, but we don't need to sign up for anything. All right, one more article I did want to bring up, not part of the required readings, but I think very helpful information as far as debt management is concerned and money management, is an article on bankrate.com, which is a site that I like. Investopedia and bankrate.com are great sites for different information when it comes to investing and money management. But Money Management 101 is an article on bankrate.com, and it talks about just the basics of money management, some tips that and we've gone over different tips and tricks sites. I think they're great. You might only come away with maybe one thing that you need to do different, but even if you only come away with one thing, then that site was highly impactful, right? We're not trying to follow everything these sites and these advice sites give, but even if they can give us one thing that helps us manage our finances better, that's well worth our time and effort. So this particular site on Bankrate has lots of different, tips that it talks about, one of which is to set money goals. And we've talked about this as it relates to budgeting, which is the next one, right? The track spending. When we talk about tracking spending and budgeting, we talk about how it could be very tedious or monotonous and really hard to stay consistent and disciplined with if we don't have some kind of overarching goal that is motivating us to do the tedious work. Okay, so if we're just saving money just for the sake of saving money and having a bigger bank account, that might not be motivating enough for us. Some people it is, most people it's not. If we're, however, saving for the next vacation, that's going to be a fun vacation, saving for the next car, that's a very nice car, saving for the future, to have a very nice retirement. That might be nice. To pay down debt, to send our kids to college. Could be a mixture of all those things I just mentioned. And those things can help us stay focused and disciplined when it comes to our, comings and goings with our money. If we don't have any goals like that, it becomes a little bit more difficult for most of us. We talked about how to automate savings. That is part of this article, but it's something that I have talked about a lot in this class. Every single session, it seems like I talk about automating the savings. Make your savings program automatic. It will increase the likelihood of success substantially for you to make things automatic. Prepare a budget. We talked about that quite a bit. Got to have some behavior changes in most cases, and usually that has to do with our spending. If we have a habit of going on every single break and getting a treat or getting a soda or getting something, it's might be good to look at that and address whether or not, yes, we need a break, yes, we need something refreshing, but maybe we could prepare something, or maybe we could do something a little bit different so that we're not spending as much on those snacks or treats or something like that. That's just a quick little example, but all of us have habits that maybe take a little bit extra money, and if we can find ways to mitigate or reduce or manage or eliminate, there are different ways to address them. Doesn't always necessarily mean we totally get rid of everything we enjoy in life, but it might make sense to scale it back a little bit. We borrow wisely. So this is to the point of different kinds of debt and how they work. This is the most important concept this week, as far as the lesson that the mod is trying to focus on or trying to educate us on, which is when we go to borrow for a house, when we go to borrow for a car, when we go to borrow for, even on a credit card sometimes, make sure that if we're ever going to borrow, that we are good borrowers, that we know our terms, that we get low rates, that we know how we're going to pay it off, that we are making excess payments when possible, that we have a debt pay down strategy, that we move debt around if we need to lower interest rates or better terms. So there are just different things we always need to be aware of, first of all, before we ever get into debt. And then once we're in debt, have a strategy to pay down. And then lastly, make sure and prioritize bills. So, this sounds pretty easy and straightforward, but you'd be surprised how many people just pay whatever's in front of them or pay whomever is the loudest. So people, if we're kind of getting behind a little bit on our bills, there are some companies that really come after us and, call us day in, day out, send us lots of scary, mail and things like that. And that creditor might not be the best creditor to pay off the soonest when we're in a situation where we're trying to get rid of our debt and trying to prioritize what the most important things are. So for example, the cable bill, getting behind on the cable bill, I think we can agree is not as important as getting behind on the gas bill or the electricity bill or our rent. But sometimes, we just get a little bit off track on how we prioritize our bills. And if we'll get them in the right priority and always execute on them that way, it'll make it easier for us to keep up with the things that are important. And sometimes it'll help us or encourage us to get rid of things that aren't important, which sometimes is a positive. So, all right, so that's all the content I had for tonight. Hopefully you were able to pick up something that you could kind of think through and use for your family finances, for your household's finances. If you have any questions or concerns from this week as far as anything that we've addressed, zip me a quick email or text me. I did get a text or an email, a couple voicemails this last week about people saying that they were going to turn in their work late. I appreciate the heads up. There's nothing we need to do about that. If you've spoken with the school, then I can give you an extension, but most people, it's not, something that they're, speaking with the school about and having an advisor be in touch with me. They're just trying to let me know that something's a little bit behind, and that's okay. You're welcome to let me know that. That's nice of you. You don't have to let me know that. You're welcome to turn things in late. I just can't give you full credit, as you know. If you do want full credit, or if you feel like there's a legitimate circumstance that the school should know about, then be in touch with the school. And if the school gets in touch with me, then I'm able to then I'm able to make exceptions. But until the school's in touch with me, I can't make any exceptions for late work. Okay? I still accept it. You still get most of the credit. I just can't, not give you a discount based on it being late in order to be fair for the rest of the class. Okay? All right. That's just a quick reminder. But have a great evening, great week. Let me know if there's anything we can do for you, and we'll visit with you next week. Thanks, Christy, for attending tonight's session.